One of the biggest myths in relationships is that caring is reflected in the amount of effort that is made. This massive misunderstanding leads so many people to walk away from relationships that are on the cusp of repair. And this myth is fundamentally incorrect about how we as humans respond to emotional threats. So in this video, I'm going to break down why understanding these mechanisms deeply is going to help you not only understand your ex's behavior, but most of all, stop you walking away from a relationship ready to be repaired. So why does it feel like your ex is relieved to let go of this relationship, even though deep down, you know that they still care about you? This is one of the most confusing parts of a breakup. Your partner's actions and emotions seem completely out of sync. And this hot and cold feeling can cause a lot of confusion, because ultimately, if you know that they care, why are they not fighting for the relationship? This doesn't seem to make sense. Well, the reason why they're doing this is because of something called emotional dissonance. This essentially is an internal conflict that comes about when two opposing emotions collide. If you imagine a stormy sea and you've got a wave that represents the fact that your partner cares, they still love you, they still feel feelings towards you, but there's another wave. And this is the exhaustion from the relationship's weight, the struggles that you've been through, and the letting go of that stress. So when these waves hit each other, they don't cancel each other out, they crash. And this leaves your partner or your ex overwhelmed and unsure how to act. So to escape that chaos, that crashing of the waves, they reject it. The breakup feels like essentially a temporary relief from this tension, from this emotional dissonance. But the thing is that this relief doesn't mean resolution. It doesn't mean that the problems are solved. This is just a temporary relief. So for your partner or your ex, breaking up eases this immediate pressure, but these unresolved feelings can remain buried, waiting under the surface. And this is why your partner can still care for you, but having this temporary relief, this reprieve, this breath of air at this moment in time can feel like it's much needed. And this is one of the reasons why they don't want to fight for the relationship. They don't want to go back under those waves. And if you've been following me for a while, you'll understand a little bit about expectancy bias. This is where expectancy bias comes into play. I've done a longer video, which I'll link to up above and in the description down below to sort of break that down for you. But just briefly, expectancy bias is when you're having these clashing emotions, your mind is kind of looking for comfort. It wants to cling to something familiar, even if the familiar is negative. So expectancy bias leads people, human beings, not just your partner or ex-partner, to look for evidence that supports this narrative that protects them from vulnerability. So your partner can start viewing the relationship through a lens of finding flaws. So it's not that they didn't love you or they never had a good time with you, but instead, internally, they're justifying their choice to break up with you by overemphasizing the negatives. And a lot of you may have found this expectancy bias to be quite rife if you're still in contact with your ex-partner. When they start to come out by talking about the flaws of the relationship, often these flaws may sound minor to you. They may sound like challenges that are easily able to be overcome. But these statements are kind of like shields, because it enables them to keep their focus on the crashing waves underneath. So they can keep their focus on avoiding these crashing waves that are happening, if that makes sense. This expectancy bias means that by focusing on the flaws of the relationship and keeping the focus there, it means that they're able to avoid the emotional risk of reconnecting because they don't want to go through that tumultuous time again. But this is the critical part. Their reluctance to fight for the relationship isn't about a lack of feelings, it's about self-protection. When people talk about vulnerability, the space for connection to happen, this can feel like stepping into a storm, stepping into these crashing waves for somebody who has, become emotionally overwhelmed. They're interpreting this as danger. So when your ex is pulling away, then it can become this push-pull dynamic between you. So you start to try to pull them closer towards you, and this makes them push you further and further away. And this is why this reconciliation process, if done in the wrong way, can cause so much unneeded energy being poured in the wrong way. If you're pulling and your partner is pushing, then one of you has to break this cycle. The more you push, the more your ex-partner retreats. And this chase amplifies your partner's fear about being trapped in this emotional intensity. And it's hard to get out of this cycle. If you think about it this way, if you have reflected and changed and started to grow and know that you are ready to take the relationship in the right direction, imagine with all those changes, you've built yourself a fire that is there to keep you and your partner warm. But as you try to convince your partner to come closer towards the fire, this fire to them doesn't represent connection, it doesn't represent warmth, it doesn't represent thawing. To them, it represents immediate heat, intense, overwhelming, burning. This is too much to handle, right? And they pull back, not because they don't value the fire, but because getting closer to it feels unbearable in that moment. This heat feels like it's going to be too much because of what it represents. So them pulling away isn't about what the fire is. It's about them understanding their own feelings in that moment. So when your partner isn't fighting for the relationship, it may look like indifference or even resentment, but oftentimes this is coming from a place of fear. They have looked at the way the relationship has been in the past, and they have this now expectancy bias. They're expecting things to be the same way again. So when you're trying to entice them close towards a fire, they're thinking that they're going to get burnt, right? So it's this fear of being vulnerable and exposing parts of themselves that they don't feel ready to share in this moment. Ultimately, they reject this vulnerability and they can start to convince themselves that they're avoiding emotional harm, which means that they're not going to tell you they have feelings for you. They're not going to tell you that they still care because they're still in this self-protection mode. And this is why it can feel so confusing. When I speak with members early on in their journey, a lot of them can be like, well, why, if they care, why does their behavior say otherwise? And ultimately, it's because these unresolved emotional conflicts don't always look like turmoil. They can show up as avoidance, avoiding you, avoiding discussions, avoiding any reminder of the struggles that they're going through. It's not some calculated plan to push you away and cause you pain. It's them saving themselves from future pain. And it's important to understand this because it changes the way that you see their actions. What a lot of my successful members have found is that as they go through the reconciliation process, they do get rejected. They get rejected multiple times, and their partner has told them, look, I am not interested in getting back with you. I'm not interested in repairing the relationship. We can speak, but this is not happening. Because this rejection is their feelings at that moment in time. In that moment in time, they are not wanting to get back with you. And this is why it's so crucial when you're trying to repair a relationship that you are not growing just to get someone back. This is why it's so important to make sure that you're growing for the sake of growing, that you're growing yourself in order to be able to build a relationship, not just entice someone back into your arms. And this also addresses the challenge of how do you stop from pouring everything that you have into chasing someone who's stuck in this mindset? In this, I care for you, but I don't want to fight for the relationship. How do you stop this cycle where the more you try, the more they pull away? Well, this brings me on to the first main mindset shift, which is this myth that love should be effortless. This is one of the massive myths that cause so much damage to relationships. People having this idea that, if everything is meant to be, then everything's just going to fall into place, right? If they don't want to be with me and they don't want to repair the relationship, it's not meant to be, I'll just move on. But this mindset sets the bar really high, and it convinces people that having challenges in repairing a relationship equals a failure of the relationship. It becomes very dichotomous. It becomes very black and white. But if you imagine relationships as a garden, if you don't water it, if you don't pull the weeds, if you don't tend to it regularly, it withers. And that's what happens with a lot of relationships when they start to fall apart and they go through breakups and they go through separations and divorces. This is how we get to a place where your partner doesn't feel safe and doesn't want to be vulnerable. The problem is that when this happens, so many people get into this idea of, well, maybe I should just not have a garden, right? Maybe I should just not have a relationship. But what they fail to realize is that the effort that you have to put in order to grow and build a relationship is the same effort that you would put in to any other relationship. So when they're walking away from the garden that they've not tended to, and they start this new garden with the same mindset of, well, here's how much I need to tend to it, then that new garden falls off in the same way. It becomes unkempt. The plants start to die and start to wither, and they don't realize that the garden that they already have can be tended to, can be grown, can be watered. But they need to understand how it got there in the first place, why the garden is in the state that it's in. These challenges aren't signs that you're incompatible. These are opportunities to be able to align and grow yourself. So this is why it's so important to make sure that when you are trying to repair this relationship, you not only understand how the garden got in the shape that it did in the first place, but also understand why your partner may not be putting in that same effort right now. But then that leaves the question, what do you do if you're the only one trying? If you're the only partner holding this relationship together or fighting for this relationship when your partner is wanting to walk away? And, I get it. It can feel like you're carrying this impossible weight. You're carrying the whole weight of the relationship on your shoulders. But the mistake a lot of people make is trying to chase someone stuck in this avoidance mode, right? This doesn't work. Trying to convince your partner, trying to fix the situation, or trying to prove how much you do care usually backfires. So why does this backfire? Because ultimately it reinforces their fear of emotional intensity, right? If you think about it this way, if they're trying to, at this moment, avoid this deep heat, right? This fire that you are sort of pointing towards, to them, that isn't the solution. This is actually the problem. This intensity, this pressure to reconcile with you causes them to feel the heat again, right? So the solution isn't fixing your partner. It's not even fixing the relationship. It's fixing your approach. This is starting with making sure that you are creating the emotional stability, the regulation within yourself. When emotions run high, stop focusing outwards and start turning inwards, shifting your energy from pursuing reconciliation to learning how to control your emotions, how to communicate better, how to learn all of the relationship skills that you need to have a healthy relationship. And ironically, this is the turning point for so much reconciliation that I see with all of my members, is that once you turn the focus inwardly and you start to focus on the right things, on the right processes, in order to build and grow yourself ready for a relationship, then the heat and the pressure that your partner is feeling dies down. And as a result of that, they start to be drawn towards you. Deeply learning how to grow yourself, this self-regulation, stops this pursuit avoidance cycle, right? It stops the chase and the push-pull cycle. And this means that instead of reacting to them pulling away by trying harder, you actually end up removing that pressure and allowing them the space to be able to return back to you. So this is not about making them realize what they're losing, but this is about building a calm and control in yourself, cultivating a self that is more like a lighthouse than a sports car chasing someone down. I know that analogy doesn't work, but I'm leaving it in. And this is what a lot of my members find, that this benefits you emotionally, right? You're putting yourself first ultimately because you're building and growing yourself. But as a secondary result, this benefits them because it creates the space for them to be able to reassess their feelings off their own back, because that pressure is off and they're not trying to run away from this intense heat they were feeling before. Ultimately, what so many of my members have found is that by removing that pressure means that they don't have to respond defensively. And it allows the space for your partner to reflect on their own feelings, whilst also still being able to see how much you are changing and are growing. And this is a really crucial shift in understanding why your partner is pulling away and not fighting for the relationship right now. And if you do want to join the members and I, then start with my relationship bootcamp. This is where all of my members start with. It gives you the fundamentals of understanding how relationships work and where to start changing in order to rebuild, regrow, and repair the relationship. If you do want to join us, I'll leave a link in the description for you. But ultimately, this is about letting your partner reflect on their feelings without this noise of conflict clouding their judgment. Right? If you think about it this way, if you're trying to get some headspace to think, to process your feelings, if someone is constantly pushing on you and giving you all this pressure to make a decision or to come back when you can't even get your head straight, this is where it becomes so much more difficult and it makes you want to push them away even more, right? No one wants to make a pressured decision. And by focusing inwards, this means that you're not fixating on what you're seeing as their lack of effort or trying to decode their behavior or trying to analyze their social media. Instead, you're shifting your focus on how you show up as the healthiest, best version of yourself possible. This is where you're able to start prioritizing how you show up in your entire life. And you're not constantly tied to how somebody else is reacting. You're able to show up and be the safe space that someone wants to walk towards. This is where you're developing a strong sense of purpose within yourself that isn't tied to your partner's actions. And this is ultimately what it means to lead a relationship. Every healthy relationship starts this way. I've actually done a deeper dive, which I'll link to on the screen, on the idea of how to lead a relationship without being controlling. Ultimately, becoming a leader within a relationship is not about being the person who's in charge. This is about leading by example. And the more that you lead by example, especially when it comes to having emotional growth, this has a magnetic quality. People are drawn to calm people who are able to regulate their emotions because it creates a sense of safety, which is very, very rare foundation in a world full of polarized, extreme points of view that you can find online. So this is why focusing on yourself, how you show up, and making sure that you are the person that is showing up as the calm in the storm. Over time, the more that you focus on that, the more they will see that your changes are real, and the more that they will start to open up and start to lead and start to follow your example and be drawn closer to you at the same time. So I'm going to leave you with that deep dive video, and I will see you over there.